Hello and welcome to Tech Raven. Well, today I've got one for you audio producers, and it's a little bit of an unusual one because I'm giving serious thought to downgrading these Kali IN-8 second wave near-field monitors that have got 8-inch bass drivers in them to these Rokit 5 by KRK, and they're the latest generation 5, but they've only got a 5-inch bass driver in them. Now you're probably thinking, Nigel, are you crazy? Why would you want to do that? I've got these monitors here that cost about £650 and they've got a good reputation for being fantastic monitors for the price for mixing and mastering compared to these, which are less than half the price at just £300. Now there is method in my madness, so bear with me on this one. So the first thing I want to cover is, let me just get it straight. I've never been a fan of KRK Rokit speakers, at least the earlier generation ones. Now I'm just going to go through the generations I've got here because the generation 1 of this particular Rokit 5 speaker came out in 2003. Then the generation 2 came out in 2008. The generation 3 landed in 2013. The generation 4 in 2019. And these generation 5 in 2024. So it was the first three, generation 1, 2 and 3, that I was never a fan of. I always felt that they were designed for EDM music or heavy industrial music, and DJs used to favor them because they tended to be a little bit bass heavy and they definitely brought their own flavor to the party. However, when generation 4 came along in 2019, they started to get a little bit better, a little bit more neutral. Now with these generation 5 ones, they are supposed to be a lot better. I've heard some really good things about them, and if I just hop onto the computer, it says here that the KRK Rokit 5, these latest generation 5 models have got DSP built in, and they've basically been designed to correct boundary issues, room reflections, and so on and so forth. And they've got 25 EQ combinations, low frequency cut, high frequency cut, and 3 different voicing modes for mix mode, create mode, and focus mode, which I'm sure anybody that's looked these up on YouTube will know that already. So you're probably thinking, well, again, why would you want to downgrade? Now, my studio here is very small, as you can see. Now, I've done my best with all the acoustic treatment. I've got tiles on the walls in the usual reflection points, behind the monitor, up on the ceiling. I've got 4 bass traps in each corner of the room to help with that. And as you can hear, I've got the sound pretty good. I like the acoustics in here. I've got a piano there, and when I play the piano, it sounds pretty good because there isn't too much reverb and echo. Now, it's not totally dead, but you don't want that anyway. So I've got it just how I like it. However, as you can see, the space is small, and this monitor on the left at the back here, I can barely even get my finger between where the speaker meets the wall. It's literally a few millimeters off this back wall, and it's right in the corner. And yes, I've got front firing ports, which helps with that, but it's still jammed in the corner. And that one is more open because I've got an open door there and more space going that way. And on top of that, they're just really big and kind of dominating. And I find that when I'm mixing and mastering with these, I've got to keep pushing my office chair right back here so I can get my head back here somewhere to form a better triangle when I'm listening to the music. And no matter how hard I've tried, and I've even tried one of the SonarWorks systems with the microphone, and I basically spent an afternoon trying to get them tuned up, but I couldn't get them exactly where I wanted them. Now, when I got these a few years ago, I was absolutely thrilled, but now time's gone by, I struggle to get them to sound good in this room. So this room is the problem. They don't do these speakers justice. So I'm not knocking the Kali IN-8 second waves. They're fantastic, but just not really in this room. I struggle with them. Now, that's why I bought these. These are a pair of Neumann NDH30. Well, they're basically monitoring headphones. They're open back, and they cost about £550, and they are absolutely fantastic for mixing and mastering. Now, I bought those so I could do most of my work using cans rather than the monitors. And then I would just flick to the Kalis just to do a little bit of A/B comparison between what I'd achieved on these compared to what I've achieved on the Kalis. Now, that brings me back to these Rokit 5s, which are a bit smaller, because they've only got 5-inch bass drivers in them instead of 8 that we have here. They'll probably be more suitable for this smaller room space that I have here. And because of all the EQ parameters, the DSP, and those various voicing modes, I should be able to tune them and get them to sound good for this space. Now, finally, let me just tell you, when I mix and master, I mix and master for myself. I don't work for any record label, so I'm not doing this in any professional capacity. I'm not mixing and mastering for the perfect radio broadcast or for an MTV broadcast or anything like that. I'm mixing for me, and that means I want my mixes to sound good in my car and in my hi-fi around the house. I've got an Audi Q3 and it's got a really nice hi-fi system in it, so I'm mixing for that because that is where I want them to sound good. In the house, in the kitchen, I've got a Sonos Play 5, and in my bedroom, I've also got a Sonos Play 5, and in my living room, I've got a Blue Sound Power Node, which is feeding a pair of Lin-Ninka floor standing speakers. So I'm mixing and mastering for myself to sound good on those systems. I'm not mixing and mastering for your hi-fi audiophile that's into critical listening that might have £30,000 worth of equipment, a top-of-the-range record player, and they'll spend £2,500 on a moving coil cartridge to upgrade from their £1,500 one because there might be some split hair of a difference in sonic performance, so they can worry about hearing that little cough that Elvis made back in that 50s recording that only they can hear on their amazing hi-fi system. Now, I've been there and done that. I used to have a Linsondek LP12 with an Itok arm, Asuka cartridge, a load of name amplifiers, and a pair of Lin Isobarrett speakers. And I used to obsess over this stuff. And to be honest, it ruined listening to music for me because I found that I couldn't just put on a Led Zeppelin vinyl and enjoy it because I would be analysing it too much. Nowadays, when I've got the Blue Sound Power Node and the Lin-Ninka speakers, Sonos speakers around the house, and the system in my car, I find that I can just listen to music and enjoy it again. So I mix for me and me only and nobody else. So I'm hoping that these will help me with that. Now, finally, I have got these little Bose monitors here, little Bose speakers. They're almost like computer speakers, and under the desk, I've got the Bose subwoofer that goes with them. Now, a few months ago, I mixed and mastered a track using these little Bose computer speakers with the sub, and then I did the same mix and master using the Carlys. Now, when I played the results back, both of them in my car, I preferred the sound of the master that I did with the Bose speakers. Again, that's not knocking the Carlys. This room just doesn't do these speakers justice. They need a bigger room, and they certainly don't want to be jammed away in a corner like this. So I'm hoping that these are going to be a step up from the Bose, and they're also going to be a step up from the Carly because they will probably be more suited for this room. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to disconnect these Carly monitors, I'm going to hook these up, I'm going to basically spend a few days putting music through, just listening to some of my favourite tunes and playlists on Spotify just to get used to the sonic characteristics of these. And then I'm going to mix and master a track, and then I'm going to let you know my findings, whether I'm going to keep them or whether I'm going to keep the Carlys. So let me do that, and I'll see you in 3 to 5 days. Okay, so welcome back. It's been several days, and as you can see, I've still got the Rokit 5 Gen 5s set up, which means I'm keeping them. The Carlys have already been sold and somebody's already been to collect them. I figured there's no point in keeping them. So let me just give you my thoughts and evaluation on these because it's a little bit strange, but I'm going to be straight with you. The other day when I was filming the first part of this video, when I had these speakers sitting here next to me on the piano stool, the first thing I did after I shot that part of the video was unbox these KRK speakers, put them on the floor, got them all ready, and then while the Carlys were still here, I opened up one of my playlists of reference tracks. Now I've got some reference tracks that I sometimes use when I'm editing in Logic that I will basically use to help me with my own mixing. So for example, if I'm mixing a dance song, I've got a couple of really good quality dance reference tracks, and I'll pull one of those in, put it onto a track in Logic, and I'll use that as a reference to help me get into the ballpark with regard to the sonic characteristics of any given song. So I've got reference tracks for dance, sort of industrial, electronic, pop, rock, a little bit of acoustic, that kind of thing, depending on what I'm mixing in Logic. So what I did, I picked 4 of my favorite tracks, and I sat down while the Carlys was still set up, moved my chair back with a cup of tea, and I spent 15 minutes listening to those 4 tracks at a decent volume level so I could just get the characteristics of those Carly IN-8s back into my brain and really focus and listen to how they sounded, just to get that sound into my head. And then what I did, I disconnected the Carlys and put these KRKs onto the stands in their place. Because the mains cables and the XLR balanced audio cables were already there, it literally took me about 30 seconds per side to replace the Carlys with these KRKs. And then about a minute later, moved the chair back, played my playlist again of the 4 songs. Now, I got to be honest, I did kind of put it into my mind. I got into the mindset that I wasn't going to be happy with these. I basically decided that, they're small. They're probably going to have that sort of honky mid-range. The bass isn't going to go loud enough. They're not going to be as good as the Carlys. And I'm going to have to send them back. I bought these from Gear for Music in the UK for about £300. And I'd basically set myself up for a disappointment and having to box them back up and send them back for a refund. So that's where my mind was. And then I would have put the Carlys back and, continued with my research. So I was just about to hit play and I was kind of cringy and thinking, oh God, I'm going to press play and what are these going to sound like? But within about 5 seconds of one of my first test tracks, by the weekend, the frown on my forehead left. And I thought, oh, okay, this is okay. 30 seconds into the song, relief washed over me in an awesome way. I thought, oh my God, these are really good. I'm really happy with the sound. And then by the time I'd listened to all 4 of those test tracks, I was thinking, you know what? These are actually better than the KRK IN-8s. Now, bear with me on this one. Again, I've already mentioned that this room, the small space in here, didn't do the KRK IN-8s justice. And the KRK IN-8s, especially this one in this corner, hated being in this corner. It just didn't sound right. In fact, it had a bit of a honky mid-range, like honk, honk, honk. And it did kind of bother me a little bit. When I first set up those Carlys, I did notice it a little bit, but it didn't bother me and I got used to it. But these don't have that. And my immediate thought was when I set these up, again, the EQ settings out of the box, it's just on flat. It's not using any of the other parameters on the EQ for creative or focus modes or anything like that. It's just on a flat mode. But even like that, I thought there's just as much bass in these as there was with the KRK IN-8s. Equal, there's no difference at all. Now, I don't care what the spec sheet says. I'm sure the Carlys go down further than these. I don't care about that or what the spec sheet says. I don't even know what the specs are of these or the Carlys because I use my ears. I don't get all geeky. And to my ears, the bass on these goes just as low as the KRK IN-8s. I didn't notice any difference. The mid-range didn't have that honkiness that the KRK IN-8s were giving me. Again, that could have been because the Carlys were possibly too big for this room, but they don't have that, which basically results in the mid-range being a little bit clearer and easier to pick things out in that sort of mid-frequency range. Now, the high-end frequencies, the cymbals, I put on the track by Grizzly Bear, where there's some really intricate drum work, some rim shots and some nice hi-hat stuff and some nice little clacky sounds. And with these, they come out really nicely, but they're not overly bright and glassy. They're just quite smooth, which I like because I've got very mild tinnitus in my left ear. On a scale of 1 to 10, it's only about 1, but it's minimal. So if I hear something bright and glassy, it can make it sort of hiss a little bit louder, but it doesn't do it with these speakers. They're nice. Now, the Gen 4s were a little bit more rounded than the previous 3 generations with regard to the treble, but the difference between the 4s and these with the higher frequencies and the treble is that these are even more rounded. I haven't heard the 4s, but watching YouTube videos, a lot of people have said the difference between the 4s and the 5s is that the 5s are a little bit smoother at the top end. So I was really surprised at how good they sounded. Now, I've since messed about with the DSP and the EQ parameters. Now, you've got a lot of scope on the EQ. You've got lots of sort of bass cuts and bass boosts and treble cuts and boosts. And then, of course, you've got the 3 settings for focus, creative, and flat. And I decided that the factory settings for this room, all I did was change it from the flat response to creative, because on flat, it is just basically a flat EQ line. On focus, it basically just scoops out the bass and scoops out the treble. So you just end up with this bell in the middle. So all the mids are kind of pushed up, which for me would be fine potentially for mixing and mastering sort of an acoustic guitar or something like that. But even then, I wouldn't want to do that. I would still want it to be at least flat because I'd want there to be a little bit of bass and higher frequencies in there just to basically give scope so you've got a comparison for that mid-range. And I can't imagine anybody taking the speakers off the stands, turning them round just to flick it to focus and then put them back just for a quick A/B test. Maybe if there was a switch on the front of the speaker or a foot pedal where you could do it, maybe, yeah, you could just flick it to focus for a few seconds and then flick it back to flat. But I can't imagine I'm going to use it because of the messing about round the back to do it. So I've actually settled on the creative setting, which pushes up the bass a little bit and it pushes up the treble. So you get this kind of EQ curve like that, and it scoops out a little bit of the mids and then goes up in the treble again. So essentially it's like a loudness control that you'd get on an amplifier. When you push the loudness control, all it's doing is pushing up the bass and it's pushing up the treble a little bit and it's scooping out a little bit of the mid, so that when you're listening at low volume levels, if you push the loudness control, it makes the music sound normal again, because it just brings back the bass and it boosts the treble a little bit. Now, because I only ever mix and master at a low to moderate level, I like to have it on that creative mode, or what I call loudness mode, because at low levels, when that's switched on, it just still makes everything sound flat and normal because the volume is so low. Now, obviously, if I was going to crank the volume up more, I would put it to flat. But I'm settling on that creative setting for the EQ curve, and it sounds absolutely perfect in this room at moderate volumes, going up to about halfway on the SSL2 Mark II I've got here, where it is getting louder. It still sounds good there. Now, you may have noticed that the stands have suddenly grown. If you rewind the video, in fact, don't worry, I'll put a picture up on the screen so you can see what it looked like with the Carlys. Because the Carly speakers were quite high, with these isoacoustic stands, these actually came with 2 sets of pipes. So you get 8 pipes that are this length, sort of 6, 7, 8 inches. And you basically get 8 pipes which are a lot shorter, of about 2 or 3 inches, which is what I had before. Now, the reason I had the shorter ones before is because anybody that knows anything about hi-fi speakers or near-field monitors like this will know that the tweeters are supposed to be roughly in line with your ear. So you're hearing the bass, the mid, and the treble all at the same time, coming towards you, all on the same level, rather than something hitting your chest or something going over your head. So that's why I've basically swapped out the smaller pipes and put these taller ones in here. And also with these stands, I think they're the best stands in the world, these isoacoustics. I highly recommend looking into them. You also get these extra short stubby bits about that long that go into here, so you can actually tilt the speaker up towards you a little bit or down by putting those little stubby pipes in the bottom here. So these are actually tilted up ever so slightly. So when I put my chair back and I'm here like this, they're actually tilting up and they are at a really good level for my ears. Now, before, when they were on the lower stands and the treble and everything was sort of coming more towards my chest, it still sounded good, but just some of the top end and mids weren't quite reaching my ear correctly. But now I've got them on the taller pipes. They're absolutely perfect for my listening level. Now, in the manual, KRK do recommend burning these in for about 30 hours at a slightly louder volume level than normal. So I'm not quite there yet, but I'm still really happy with how they're sounding. And again, in the manual, it says to sit at least 3 foot away from them and having them 3 foot apart at least, which they are here. They're about 3.5 foot at least apart there. And when I actually push my chair back, I won't do it because I'll go out shot, but when I push my chair back, I'm basically about 5.5 feet away from them that way. So I've got this nice triangular shape going on. So yeah, I'm really impressed with them. Now, I do say that they sound better than the Carlys, but that's only in this acoustic space because it's a small room, and I think the Carlys were a little bit overkill. Now, it is amazing how the bass is just as strong and it's just as deep and it's got just as much weight as the Carlys, even though they're only a 5-inch woofer instead of an 8-inch woofer. So it just goes to show that sometimes the spec sheets don't really mean all that much. You've got to use your ears. Now, I'm still going to be using my trusty Neumann headphones for majority of the mixing and mastering, but at least now I can flick to these and know that they sound better in this acoustic environment. So I guess the moral of this story is, guys, that don't be a gadget man, be an artist, be creative, because if you get too hung up on things like audio interfaces, monitors, microphones, that's just going to get in the way of you being creative. So I just say get on with composing and mixing and mastering, and don't overthink the equipment. I mean, at the end of the day, whether you get these or Yamaha HS5, some small Adam audios, it really doesn't matter. Just get whatever monitors you want to get and just get on with being creative. Again, with audio interfaces, this SSL2 Mark II, for example, it's like £250, £260. Now, this is better quality than a big SSL mixing desk that would have cost a couple of £100 back in the 80s, because technology has come on so much. So, you can get one of these, you can get one of the little Arturia Fuse audio interfaces for £120, and they're just absolutely top notch. Same for microphones. I've just got this little Lewitt microphone here that I use. And over there, I've got a Sennheiser that I use. I had a Neumann U87 AI. It was like £2,600. Just a suspension basket for that was £300. And I had that for about 6 months before selling it, because the Sennheiser I've got now, it's just as good. There's no real discernible difference. There might be a slight little flavor difference, but at the end of the day, we EQ vocals anyway in Logic or Pro Tools or whatever it is you use. So as soon as you start EQing it, you're losing the mic's characteristics anyway. So it doesn't matter what mic, get a Rode, get a Lewitt, get a Sennheiser, get whatever you want. Just get an audio interface, get some monitors, get some cans, and just get on with being creative, compose and enjoy music. Don't get all hung up on equipment. And that's the moral of this story, because these, for me personally, in this room, they're better than the Kali IN-8s. Okay, I think I've talked enough. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, maybe I'll see you in the next one. Till then, bye for now.